Before I begin, may I request any of the organizing member to please distribute these brochures. Yeah, they basically have information about the REACH regulation and how it is relevant for the exporters of apparel. Yeah, while we get started, may I know how many people in this company happen to be exporting to Europe specifically? Fine, thank you. Yeah, because REACH is basically a European regulation, yeah. So I just thought I would take an idea as to how many people are directly impacted by the regulation. Well, REACH is a regulatory subject. It is a seemingly complex regulation, but I will try my best to address the issue of chemical substances present in the apparel industry and what compliance obligations these chemicals present in the apparel place on the exporters of apparel to Europe. Very briefly about REACH support. We are one of India's most sought after help desks, especially for REACH related services, because we were founded to exclusively provide REACH compliance assistance and advisory services, because the industries, I'm afraid, have very little understanding or a very confused understanding of the REACH regulations. So therefore we established REACH support. As you can see, we cater to 800 Indian companies, but most of them are exporters of chemicals to Europe. Yeah, but then there are also companies which export articles, because articles, by articles I mean apparel, leather goods, yeah, electrical and electronics, automotive components, because all these articles have chemicals embedded into them, and therefore the articles also come under the purview of REACH. For chemical exporters, we offer the entire basket of REACH related services except testing. But for article exporters, we provide the very important service of assessing their production line and indicating to them whether they need to go in for any testing of the so-called toxic substances of very high concern, SVHC and restricted substances, because SVHC and restricted substances are the two categories of chemicals that are referred to when the REACH regulation is applied to the exporters of articles. And there are several REACH service providers in India, but then REACH support's expertise on the regulation basically stems from the fact, as Dr. Taylor just mentioned, because we were sponsored by the European Commission to study the REACH regulation even before it became a law in June 2007. And we specifically studied how REACH would impact the non-European industries that export to Europe. So therefore our expertise on REACH is due to the fact that we've been studying the regulation since almost the past 5 years, and this regulation, let me inform you, is still developing by the day. There are new guidelines being released by the European Chemical Agency. So we follow that closely, and I take pride in saying that we are one of India's most sought after help desk services by virtue of our expertise with the subject. Yeah, there's another logo in my title slide and the brochure that have been given to you, SSS, Sustainability Support Services Europe. Because REACH is a European regulation, obviously there has to be a European legal entity to help the non-European companies to comply with this regulation. Therefore, our sister concern, Sustainability Support Services Europe, SSS. We established a company in Sweden to offer the REACH compliance assistance services, and then we've been knowledge partners to several organizations, AEPC being one of them, the Electronics Industry Association, CII, we are the preferred knowledge partner of the Confederation of Indian Industry Institute of Quality, to help their so many members who are impacted by REACH to comply with the regulation. Then we also are working with one of the biggest industry associations in China, CCCMC, as well as CIECC, which is an electronics association. And then we've also done some work with the Export Development Board in Sri Lanka. Well, in my presentation, I will take you briefly through what REACH as a regulation is all about, but very briefly, without going into the details of the regulatory part. Why is REACH compliance important for the exporters of garments, apparel, home furnishing, home textiles to Europe? I'll give you the definition of I'll give you the definition of article within REACH and how apparel qualifies as an article within REACH. We'll also see how the apparels, accessories and embellishments are treated within the regulation. And then, as I said, the key part of my presentation happens to be the SVHC, substances of very high concern, and the restricted substances. I also have a list of few substances that are restricted and commonly used in the apparel industry. Then I'll brief you through the obligations that the exporters to Europe would have if any of the SVHC or the restricted substances happens to be present in their apparel. Yeah, so basically those obligations happen to be notification, communication. We'll also briefly look at a typical apparel supply chain and where the chemical inputs actually come, at what stages. Also, because the exporter might not be having the entire production line in-house. He might say, but I don't dye my fabric. It is the problem of my dyer. But because the onus of REACH compliance falls on the exporter to Europe, you have to kind of get into detailed communication with your supply chain people. Yeah, because the onus for REACH compliance would be on you, and unless you know what is into your production chain, it becomes difficult for you to cater to the certificate or the compliance requirements of your European buyers. And then, in conclusion, I would like to suggest to you the recommendations which have been given by the European Chemical Agency on how the apparel companies, because the regulation as such is complicated, because the apparel, the garments, they come into so many different varieties, so many different colors, embellishments, etc. being used, which makes the situation all the more complex. I would conclude by suggesting the way ahead for easy compliance with the regulation. Well, REACH is an acronym for Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restriction of Chemicals. Yeah, and what does this regulation require? It basically requires either the exporters of chemicals as such or the exporters of garments which contain chemicals in them to provide information about what chemical is contained in the garment. Yeah, so its REACH is all about information on chemicals, because this is a very vital aspect which is missing. There are so many different chemicals being used, but there is very little information available on the physicochemical, toxicological and ecotoxicological properties of these chemicals. Therefore, REACH says if you want to export chemical containing products into Europe, please tell us what chemicals are contained in those products. Yeah, so that is the underlying principle of REACH, information. Right? For exporters of chemicals, the major compliance process is registration, and it is a much more elaborate process. Much more information needs to be submitted by the exporters of chemicals as such. But then for exporters of apparel which contain some chemicals, the requirements within the regulation are pretty toned down, and it is known as notification. Yes, but let me emphasize that notification is a requirement, but one can only know that after the assessment has been done. So basically notification will also not be mandatory to each and every exporter of apparel. Obviously, why is REACH compliance important? Because if the business has to go to Europe, the compliance is important. Yes. Now, as I said, REACH applies to chemicals in a major way, and then to articles containing chemicals. So within REACH, the first deadline for high volume chemicals, the first deadline for registration of high volume chemicals was 30th November 2010. Now the second deadline for medium volume chemicals will be 31st of May 2013. Yes. So because there is a pretty long gap between the two deadlines, and from the enforcement calendar that the European Chemical Agency ECHA, it releases from time to time, it is now expected that the focus of the enforcement agencies in Europe will shift towards the articles. The focus would shift from the chemicals to the articles, and enforcement would begin pretty shortly, maybe by the end of this year or early next year. Yeah. Obviously, REACH compliance becomes important for customs clearance. We have many textile exporters writing mails to us that our goods are held up at the customs, so give us a REACH certificate. But it's not a kind of a standard certificate that we write the name of the company, the products that they export and give it. It has to be preceded by a thorough assessment of the production line, as I said. Yeah. So therefore, REACH is important to ensure customs clearance, also to cater to the demands of a certification which is being requested by many European buyers. Yeah, and they also prefer that the certification should be from a European legal entity. Yeah, just in case there is some legal hassle, it's better that the European legal entity can be kind of taken to task. Yes, and as I said, certification cannot be provided outrightly. It has to be preceded by a detailed assessment process. Well, definition of article within reach. Reach says that article is any object which is given a specific shape, surface and design, and this shape, surface and design are more important to the functionality of the object than the chemical composition. Yes, so that is the definition of article. And apparel, obviously they come in various shapes, they come in various size, obviously to perform different functionalities. Yeah, sorry. Therefore, articles are, apparel, garments are treated as articles within the REACH regulation. Well, accessories and embellishments, people sitting here know much better than me, but 2 points that I would like to emphasize here. One is, accessories and embellishments are one of the principal sources of chemicals going into your apparel. Yeah, because most of the apparel these days, by virtue of the fashion requirements, changing trends, yeah, they have to be loaded with lots of apparel. Yes, lots of accessories, I'm so sorry. And the second important thing that I would like to stress is, there could be exporters of accessories and embellishments as such. Yes, so if there are two situations, the accessories and embellishments being exported to Europe as such, and accessories and embellishments being put on the garments, the clothing, and then they being exported to Europe. So here the requirements to the apparel, the accessories and the embellishments would differ. Yeah, so this is the point that I would just like to highlight here. Well, coming to substances of very high concern, SVHC they call it. Bottom line, any substance, any chemical substance which is very toxic to the human health and the environment will ultimately find its way into the SVHC list. Yeah, and just to give you a brief background on how this list is finalized by ICAHT. It's not that ICAHT comes up with a list, now see this is the SVHC list and we don't want these substances to be present in the garment. It is not like that. The issue is, every European member state, yeah, it recommends to ICAHT chemicals which it feels is toxic, and there is irrefutable scientific evidence proving that that particular chemical is toxic. Yes, so ICAHT pools this list of SVHC, yeah, and then they put it up for public consultation for 45 days. Yeah, so if one logs into, one does a Google and just searches ECHA, it can go on to the ICAHT site. There is a separate section on SVHC and there is a public consultation link given. The public consultation period is for 45 days. Anybody from any part of the world is free to kind of give their comments on the list of SVHC, but it has to be, you just can't say that no, nickel should not be there. It should be backed by scientific evidence as to why you don't agree that nickel should be on the SVHC list, just as an example. Yeah, and once this public consultation period is over, then ICAHT kind of, the technical experts at ICAHT, they sit together, they evaluate all the objections and inputs that have been released, and then the SVHC list is finalized. So it is finalized gradually in stages. Technically, what are SVHCs? PBT, persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals. VPVB, very persistent, very bioaccumulative. CMR, carcinogen, mutagen and reprotoxic, substances causing cancer, mutagenicity and toxicity to reproduction. Some endocrine disrupting substances also have found their way into the SVHC list. So therefore, as I said, generically one could say that very toxic substances will ultimately be categorized as SVHC in the final analysis. Till date, ICAHT has finalized 53 SVHC substances. The list started with 13 SVHC substances in the year 2009, early part of 2009, and today it has grown to 53 SVHC substances. As I said, we are the knowledge partners for the Apparel Export Promotion Council, and for whom we have set up a REACH help desk exclusively for the apparel industry. Yeah, that's the first link, www.apparel-reach.com is that particular help desk, and you can find a lot of information. But then may I just a word of caution that that site is yet being developed from the inputs that we've received very recently from AEPC. The ECHA site, echa.europa.eu, is another site where you can find loads of information, and reach-or.com is the website of REACH support. Yeah, so you can find what are those 53 SVHC substances. The other important aspect is Annex 17 within the regulation. Yeah, because this Annex 17 is a list of restricted substances and the conditions in which the restrictions apply. Yeah, so Annex 17 basically gives the name of the chemical and the conditions under which that particular chemical is restricted. And please note that the restricted substances list has already come into force since June 2009. Yeah, these are a few chemicals that I picked up from the restricted substances list, which I used in the apparel industry. Yeah, so it basically gives the limits for isocolorants. It shouldn't be above 30 ppm in the finished article, like bedding towels, nappies, which can come in direct contact with the skin. Yeah, for nickel, it shouldn't be used where in which particular accessory, and when it is used in a garment. The second chemical, 54, 55, 55(1), it says that it shouldn't come because all these are basically allergens, and then they could cause rashes on the skin, they could trigger allergies. Yeah, so I thought I could share a few chemicals on the restricted substances list, but they are used in the textile industry even today. Well, coming down to the compliance requirements within the regulation, essentially 3 requirements. First is pre-registration and registration. But it is important to remember that this obligation, which is the pretty stiffest obligation of the 3 that we will be discussing today, this obligation only applies to exporters of apparel if their garment contains any chemical which will be intentionally released when the apparel is being put to use. Yeah, the word intentional release is important. The release should be deliberate, and this deliberate release should add value to the function of the garment. Yeah, I have a few examples for you in my next slide. So if the release of a chemical is intentional, and if the quantity of this intentional release chemical will exceed 1 ton per annum in your annual export of that particular fabric going to Europe, then you have pre-registration and registration obligations. But you can check if that particular substance has already been registered for use in apparel, then the apparel exporters have no obligation for pre-registration and registration. Yeah, a few examples of intentional release, like smelly socks. Yeah, to overcome this problem, we have antibacterial agents which have been deliberately introduced into the fabric of the socks, so that when the socks is being used, these antibacterial agents come out and then they avoid the foul odor. Fragrance shirts, special finishes, as Manjari was mentioning. Yes, and for baby innerwear, you have softeners that come out when the baby wears the nappies to prevent rashes to the delicate skin. So all these are examples of intentional release. Whatever chemical is being put will deliberately come out, and it will impart an additional functionality rather than just clothing. Yeah, but then other than these kind of special garments, pre-registration and registration obligations seem highly unlikely for the majority of the apparel exporters. The second obligation, notification. Pre-registration and registration is of any chemical, but notification is specific to the SVHC list that is finalized by the European Chemical Agency. Yeah, but when do you notify? When 2 conditions are simultaneously met. The first condition being that the SVHC should be present in greater than 0.1% weight by weight in the apparel, and this 0.1% of the SVHC should total up to 1 tons in your annual exports going to Europe. Yeah, the 1 ton threshold is a pretty high threshold. Yes. And but then for notification to apply, both these requirements have to be simultaneously met. There might be a case wherein SVHC is present, it is present in very low quantities, yeah, probably lower than 0.1% weight by weight, or sometimes greater, present in 0.1% weight by weight, but not breaching the 1 ton per annum threshold. In such cases, the third obligation, which is the most watered down obligation, the obligation to communicate the presence of the SVHC, will apply to the exporter of apparel.
The amount of the chemical. You are talking about, not the exported material.
No, not of the garment.
Not the garment. So that
not the garment. Therefore, I say the 1 ton per annum threshold for the chemical, yeah, is a pretty high threshold.
Exactly.
Yes. So, it depends whether it's exceeded or not. It would vary with case by case. It would vary case by case. Now, just to give you an idea as to when you say notification obligation, what are the information to be submitted in notification? Because as I said, REACH regulation is all about providing information. So in notification, if any SVHC is present and it satisfies the two conditions, 0.1% weight by weight and 1 ton per annum being exceeded, what do you have to provide to the European Chemical Agency? Obviously, who is the producer of that particular article? And as I said, the first registration deadline for chemical is already over. So if that SVHC was being produced in very high volumes and if it has already been registered before 30th November 2010, then you need to indicate that registration number, but only if it is available to you. Then the identity of the SVHC. Basically, the European importer needs to know which is that particular toxic substance amongst the 53 that is present in your particular article. The classification, what are its hazard, what level of toxicity that particular chemical presents, just so that an informed decision can be made by the customer whether the chemical that is present in the article is too hazardous, whether he should buy it or not, whether the safe use measures which are indicated make him feel comfortable that he can use the article without affecting his or his baby's health. Yes. The brief description of the use of SVHC. One has to say why this SVHC is very important to be used. Probably because there is no substitute available for the dye which gives it that particular finish. Yeah, the reasons could be varied. Yes, and then the tonnage range in which the SVHC is present. It could be a little too technical, but then I've tried my best to keep it easy to understand. So in the last slide we saw what would be the notification requirements like, and then now we also need to know what are the deadlines. As I said, the SVHC list is being finalized in stages. The first list came in came in the early part of 2009. Yes, today we have 53 lists. So ICA said that all the SVHC substances which were put on the SVHC list before the 1st of December 2010, yeah, they would have had to comply till last June of this year, 1st of June 2011. And now subsequently the other SVHC substances which will be put on the list after 1st of December, they will have just 6 months for the compliance. They means the exporters of articles if they have notification obligations. Yeah, the exporters would have only 6 months to comply once the additional SVHC lists are finalized by the European Chemical Agency. Well, in communication requirement, as I said, communication requirement is the most watered down compliance requirement. All you need to inform is what is that SVHC, the name of the chemical, if you can provide, and measures for safe use. Yeah, you have to indicate that fine, this chemical is present, but my nature of apparel is such that it will not come in contact directly with the skin. Yeah, probably it is present in some garment which is usually worn as an outer garment. Yeah, so once this information is provided, your exporter obligation is complete, and then there's no need to kind of make enormous changes in the supply chain. You can yet continue to use that particular SVHC. Yeah, this is a very simple apparel supply chain, but it is a typical apparel supply chain, and as you can see, the chemical inputs come only in 2 stages, the dyeing and printing, and then accessorizing and embellishments. Yeah, so if you just focus on these 2 stages of your apparel supply chain, then the REACH compliance activities can start by focusing on just these 2 parts of the apparel supply chain. Well, dyes and pigments. As I said, what does an exporter need to look out for? He needs to know what is that dye. Yeah, ignorance will no longer hold good. Yeah, because we have many people, exporters from Jaipur, who say that my dyeing is done in a very small village. Yeah, they don't even know the chemical of the dye, name of the chemical that they are using to dye. Yeah, so sometimes they use vegetable dye. Fine, as long as it is a dye of natural origin, doesn't matter. But then when it is a chemical based dye, you need to know what chemical is present in the dye, because only then will you be able to give a certification to your European buyer whether any of the listed SVHC is actually present in the dye that is being used for dyeing and printing. If you come to know what is the SVHC, then you need to quantify it. If qualitatively an SVHC is present, your work has to go one step ahead in quantifying the SVHC, working out the two thresholds, and if both the thresholds are breached, then you know that you have to submit a notification to ICA. Please bear in mind that you don't need to substitute the dye. You can yet continue to use the dye which has a particular SVHC, provided you have complied to your notification obligations. So the European Chemical Agency is not talking about major changes in the supply chain. All it says is give us information about the toxic chemical which is present. Similarly, for accessories and embellishments, one needs to know whether it is nickel, whether it is chrome, whether it is cadmium, whether it is lead. Yes, and if there is, one needs to know the quantity just to make sure whether notification has to be done, or you can only just communicate, fulfill your obligations, provide a certificate to your European buyer and continue to export without any hassle. As I said, if the entire production chain is in-house, the task for REACH compliance becomes pretty easy. Yeah, you just see, you sit with your dye master, you ask him what are the dyes that we use for different shades, and just kind of go to the ICA website or go to the Apparel Reach, any of the websites which has this list of SVHC, and you can just tally, at least first hand you can make a self-assessment whether the dyes that are being used have any of the SVHC or not. Yeah, but then more often than not, the production line is not in-house, entirely in-house. Yeah, it is kind of dyeing is outsourced, accessories and embellishments are brought from third-party suppliers. Yes, so therefore it is very important for the final exporter of the apparel to address the two main supply chain links, the dyers as well as the accessories and embellishment suppliers. Yeah, now you have to ask them, now you need to tell me what chemical you are using. Yes, and then there are other business ways of kind of getting the information from them. Yeah, probably till date nobody kind of wanted to know which were the chemicals used in the dyeing, and therefore people haven't looked into that issue. But now because it will become a mandatory part to comply with the REACH regulation, we are sure that, because even 5 minutes, no problem. Yes, sure. Yeah, because as I said, we represent over 800 chemical companies, of which some are large and some are really small. Yes, but they really know what identity is their chemical. They know the CAS number. They know whether it has an EC number. Yeah, so it's not that a small chemical manufacturer doesn't know the identity of his chemical. The only thing is engaging him in proactive discussions and getting out the information from him. Yeah, so therefore I would like to emphasize on this issue of supply chain communication, because the ultimate onus of REACH compliance is on the final exporter. Would like to conclude with the recommendations that have been given by ICA, and I have quoted verbatim. It says, although chemical analysis may be helpful in certain situations, yeah, because this is the most preferred route of compliance by the exporters. Whenever anything comes, they just go to a test house. This is my list. Please check whether these things are present in my apparel or not. But then tell me, the SVHC list is expected to grow to over 200 chemicals. So how many chemicals do you test? For each batch, do you test it? Yeah. So it becomes pretty complicated. Therefore, ICA says chemical analysis might be helpful in certain situations. Particles, when you have to analyze a chemical, how do you analyze? You don't analyze the fabric. You have to leach out the chemical which is present in the fabric and then do the analysis. So in these cases, there are instances where an SVHC was present, but because the solvent use was such that it reacted with the solvent and disintegrated, or in some cases SVHC was not there, but the other dye that was present in the fabric reacted with the solvent and produced an SVHC. So basically all these are examples of testing giving erroneous results. Yeah, so, and many a times like cobalt dichloride, yeah, that is on one of the SVHC, and it is a chemical in the mordant dyes. Yes, so when one analyzes cobalt dichloride, the test lab will just analyze cobalt and the chloride, yeah, and then it will do some quantification to give you the quantity of cobalt dichloride. Yeah, so basically when such calculations have to be done, even when you analyze the substances, even when you test the substances, even when you spend so much of money into these testing procedures, why not involve adopt the other routes? Yeah, obviously testing has to be done. Sorry, that's my last slide. Obviously testing has to be done. We don't say that you can make do without testing, but we say that test only those chemicals which are probable to be present. Yeah, out of the today we have 53 SVHC, but once the assessment of the production chain is done, you might arrive at a situation that only 2 out of the 53 SVHCs are probable to be present in your product going into Europe. Yeah, so we say, okay, these could be present, so why take a chance? Just test your export product for these 2 particular SVHCs. So that is basically the message that I want to convey. And many times people ask us, the packaging that goes with our article, is that also to be considered as an article? Yes, because the product that you export is an article to be treated separately from the packaging in which it goes. Yes, but not to fret, if packaging ultimately ends up as waste in Europe, you have no obligations. But if the packaging is also put on the shelf with the garment, yeah, then you just need to see whether it has any SVHC or not. Our experience says that packaging materials usually don't have SVHCs to that level which would warrant any REACH compliance obligations. So I thank you all for a patient hearing, and I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Naidu. And really it's an excellent presentation, because this is something which is going to come, and those who are exporting to Europe about all these regulations, if they are seriously interested in making business with Europe. So few questions, because we are behind the schedule and it's a tea break time. We don't want to miss tea, but at the same time 1 or 2 questions I can take. If there are no questions, I think maybe we can understand, take it for granted that we have understood the subject well. And naturally, this is not the subject where in one go we can. You have, yeah.
Is it necessary for the chemical manufacturer to register or register a substance which is already registered? How do you know? Yeah. Suppose I am an exporter. I am an exporter of a certain chemicals, and I have not registered now, but I want to export this material, and this has been registered by somebody else.
See, basically REACH says there are so many exporters of a same chemical, yeah, but then everybody has to fulfill their REACH compliance obligations individually. Yeah, so I can explain to you the process, but then it's a little complicated. Pre-registration will be done by everybody. So all the people who have pre-registered the same chemical, they are put in a similar group, which is known as a SIEF, Substance Information Exchange Forum. Yes. Now within the SIEF, they elect a lead registrant, because pre-registration is not the end of the REACH compliance. Registration is. Yeah. So they elect a lead registrant who will do the registration. Yes. He will do the registration and he will submit the technical information, yeah, on the Phys-Chem, Tox and Ecotox property of the chemical on behalf of all the other potential registrants who want to register. Okay. Yeah, and then the follow-on registrants, they just have to submit the details specific to their company, like what is the chemical, what is the manufacturing process that they are using, because that could vary from manufacturer to manufacturer. Yeah. So therefore, everybody has to fulfill their REACH compliance obligations individually. The lead registrant submits the technical part of the dossier, and then the follow-on registrants, they submit their the information specific to their company. So that is how this whole thing works.
What is the cost involved?
Costs are they could vary from,
registrants.
As I said, the costs vary upon what chemical we are talking, whether it's a specialty chemical or it is a commodity chemical, and also the tonnage. Yeah, so the costs are worked out upon cost. The type of chemical, the tonnage of the chemical, as also the size of the company. Because if it is a small and medium enterprise, then ICA obviously has a smaller registration fee.
Since when this restriction chemical, that word came in? Earlier it was a registration, evaluation, authorization.
And restriction has always been there, but because if an R was put, the acronym wouldn't work out well. Okay. Therefore they've just said registration, evaluation, authorization, but an R is yet there, and it was there since REACH was being discussed. Because the ultimate objective of REACH is the chemicals which pose tremendous hazards and for which there are no substitute would ultimately go on the restriction list.
Yeah, friends.